Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to get started in just a minute here. We'll let our platform let everyone in, give it a minute. You'll notice as you're joining, your cameras are automatically off, your mics are automatically muted. They will stay that way throughout today's session, but please feel free to use the chat. You can head over to the chat right away, give us a greeting, let us know where you're tuning in from today. We would love to hear from you. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone. Wonderful. Thank you all for joining. Feel free to head into the chat, give us a greeting. I see some of those are starting to come through. Perfect. Hi, Danny. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this youth election town hall. Vote like your mental health depends on it. We are really excited to have you all here with us tonight. We have some really great information, resources, and speakers that will take you through some different voting information. So please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be emailed out to everyone who registered within 1 week. We will also send out a link where you can request a certificate of attendance for being here, and we'll also include all of the information that's shared in regards to our voter guide and other materials that will be helpful to you. So we'll be posting those in the chat throughout today, but don't worry, those will also come in a follow-up email if you're not able to grab them out of the chat and here in our presentation. Like I mentioned, your cameras are off and mics are muted, so we encourage you to use the chat today to ask questions, make comments, share information and resources. We always love being able to engage with you through the chat. We will have some time for Q&A throughout today's session, so feel free to be adding your questions into the chat and we'll be collecting those throughout. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Jackie to introduce our topic for tonight and get us started with some discussion.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for being here tonight, whether you're here seeking information for yourself or on behalf of someone else. Really, really appreciate your presence and glad to be here. Like Jackie had mentioned earlier, we encourage you to share your name, where you're logging in from, and we'd also love to hear why you're here. What brings you to this space? Why are you interested in this topic? What do you hope to learn? I can start by sharing why I'm here. I'm here because I believe in the collective voice of young people, and I believe in their power at the polls to really make an impact. And I hope to help empower and encourage folks to do that this year and every year. So we can move on to our agenda today. So in today's webinar, we've got a couple of things going on. Overall, our goal is to demystify the electoral process and open up some conversations, hopefully answer some questions, maybe kind of demystify some of the more complicated challenges that are involved in voting, especially for young people. So we're going to start with an overview. We're going to talk about what's at stake in this current election cycle and how it can impact mental health. Then we'll move on to our youth panel featuring members of MHA's Youth Policy Accelerator program and answer some questions about how young people can make their voices heard at the polls. And then we'll pass it over to an audience Q&A and see what you want to know. So please, if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be tracking those as we go on. And finally, we'll be sharing some further resources for you to take and to share as we leave the space and continue to advocate. Advocate for folks to get out to the polls and get out the vote. With that, I will continue on to Tim, who will be presenting for us just a quick introduction on why mental health matters this election. Tim is the Vice President of Federal Government Affairs for Mental Health America, and I will pass it to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jackie, and welcome to all of you who are here. It's so exciting to see so many people on board. So I'm Tim Clement, as Jackie mentioned, Vice President of Federal Government Affairs at Mental Health America. However, Before I was at Mental Health America, I worked for the American Psychiatric Association and an organization called the Kennedy Forum, and I've done a lot of state government relations work as well. So I've done both state and federal work. Why am I here? Well, I'm here because I have a public health background, and way back in the olden days when I was in public health school, I learned about the mental health crisis in this country. And this was a long time ago, before it was as bad as it is today. And I was shocked that I'd never heard about this as a public health student. And I realized that none of my other public health colleagues would even identify this as a crisis or even said that it was even necessarily public health. So for me, this is very much rooted in this is a public health issue. And so just to kick us off into what's at stake here, first of all, the number one thing that is at stake according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, over 440 people die every day from an overdose and suicide. So that's a catastrophic number. When I first started using those daily totals in 2017, it was 245. So it's gotten so much worse in 7 years, despite all the attention on it. So what's at stake beyond that? So a lot of you are familiar that we talk a lot in this country about a mental health crisis. We talk about the opioid epidemic. One thing I think to give you context is that right now mental health is a hot button issue. It didn't used to be that way. And so for one of the really the first time in the history of this country in government, in politics, government, doing something about mental health is a popular idea. It's a bipartisan idea. However, there's lots of different ideas of what could be done. So that's why voting really, really matters. And not so much it's not saying this in a partisan way. It's just that who you vote for, and that's whether it's who you vote for president, who you vote for Congress, who you vote for Senate, and especially who you vote for your state legislative races, they may have very different ideas of what might need to be done and what could be done. Some might be really great ideas, some might be not so great ideas, some might be ideas that aren't that well vetted, but that's something that's very, very important for anyone when you're getting into voting is figure out the candidates that you can potentially vote for. That's the president, whether that's the United States Senate, you're a congressional member of the House of Representatives, or your state representative, your state senator. Go look into that candidate and what their ideas are on mental health. Call, reach out to them. Try to, send them an email. Try to call them. If someone's already, let's say a member of Congress, you can call their office and you probably will get a response because believe it or not, it's not that frequent. The constituents, particularly young people, are calling into congressional offices and asking, what's your policy position on X, Y, or Z? So when it comes to mental health, I think that's the most important things at stake here. Things are absolutely going to happen in Congress, in the federal administration, regardless of who's the president, and in your state legislative arenas, and then also state agencies like state departments of health, state departments of mental health. Things are going to happen. Lots and lots and lots of things are going to happen. I forgot to mention governor. That governor is very, very important in terms of how your state addresses various things related to mental health, whether that's the Department of Health, whether that's the Department of Mental Health, whether that's the state insurance department that enforces mental health parity laws. There's a lot of things that matter in terms of who you vote for. And, the most important thing you can do is try to educate yourself on the options you have in front of you because it will matter. And this, again, like I said, it's not necessarily party based, but who you vote for Congress and who ends up winning might have some ideas on mental health that are great and they might be wonderful. They might have some ideas that are not so great, or they might not care at all. That's very important to try to figure that out. And because, regardless, you want to make sure that there are members from both political parties or independents as well that are passionate about mental health. Then there are some that they care about it, and that's something that they want to address. And there's some that either they don't care at all, or they have some pretty not so great ideas about mental health and substance use disorder that you probably don't want them, being in Congress or your state legislature. So it's very important that what the issues are that the candidates potentially have, what the issues are that they can address. And that's an important thing too. There's different things that Congress can do. There's different things that your state legislature can do. There's different things that a governor can do, and there's different things that a presidential administration can do. But there's lots and lots and lots and lots of things that they do. So if you think that it doesn't matter, no, it does, because there are lots of things that government officials are going to do related to mental health over the next 2 to 4 years after this coming election. And they're going to be different based on who you vote for. It's as simple as that. That's something that's very important is that regardless of whether you vote or not, things will happen as it relates to government actions on mental health, substance use disorder, the scope of the response, the type of a response, and you have an opportunity to shape that, and you definitely have an opportunity. And I think a lot of you are probably here because you're very passionate about this. Also, after you vote, it's important to stay engaged. Don't just vote. Once you vote, get into contact with your elected officials, even if you didn't vote for them, even if you voted for the opponent. Contact their office. Say, I'm a voter. I'm a constituent in your district, whether that's your state House representative, your state senator, your U.S. representative, your U.S. senator, the governor. Probably not going to get in touch with the president, but reach out to those offices, the elected officials. Also, reach out to people in agencies that are underneath the governor, underneath the president, and just let them know that you're there and you care, and these are the issues, and you're paying attention. That's the most important thing. I remember I had a meeting with some state legislators a long time ago, and I asked them, what what makes you know if somebody cares about an issue that's important? And they're like, well, if we get 6 or 7 emails about it, like we think it's important. So just think about that. Just 6 or 7 emails can make a state legislator think, oh my gosh, I should pay attention to this idea. So you think it doesn't, so your vote matters, but then your actions and your outreach also matter as well. So you don't want to just vote, you vote and you follow up. Even if the person, you didn't vote for the person, that person still represents you, whether that's your state House representative, your state senator, your U.S. House representative, your U.S. senator, the governor, the president, the administration, both state and federal. So that's something that's very important you have to understand, is that regardless of who wins, who loses, who's in office represents you, and it's always your your opportunity to remind them, say you're paying attention and you're going to keep on voting. And you don't have to tell them whether you voted for them or not. That's your private information. You don't have to ever have to tell anyone who you voted for. You can if you'd like to, if the person in office is someone that you voted for. But it's very important to vote because things are going to happen related to mental health, whether you vote or not. And your vote could influence how those things happen and to what extent those things happen. And if they go in a direction that maybe you like, or if it goes in a direction maybe you don't like. And even if your preferred candidate doesn't win for whatever office it might be, and for the multiple candidates, you still got to stay engaged because there's not just one election in your lifetime. There's many elections, and then the elections are important, but the day-to-day operations of government, that's really important too. So it's something that voting is important, being engaged, understanding the positions that the candidates might have. Also, you can push candidates and you can push your elected officials. Maybe they don't have a position on a certain issue that's really important to you. You can reach out to them and tell them, this is an important issue. This is why I'd like you to pay attention to it. Will it work? I don't know, but you'll never know unless you try. So that's the most important thing I can tell you, is voting is incredibly important because things will happen related to mental health, whether it's Congress, your state legislature, presidential administration, government and governors and their administrations. And it's going to happen. And it's either going to happen with your voice involved or it's going to happen without your voice involved. And so with that, I am going to turn it back over to Jackie and the panel.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for that succinct sort of overview. I feel like there was a lot to kind of take away even just from that overview. I really like the sentiment that these processes will happen with or without you, so hopefully with. Um, and with that, we'll transition over to our panel. So this panel is made up of a couple different folks, including some young leaders from our Youth Policy Accelerator program. And more than anything, I just really want to encourage everyone on the panel and also everyone in the chat is just to be open and honest, as much as we want to encourage and elevate the impact of voting. We also want to recognize that it can be challenging. It can be really overwhelming. It can be really confusing for folks. It can be a really tough process, especially when we're talking about the impact that we feel our votes do or don't have. I know that can be a tough conversation. So just really, in the spirit of open and honest conversation, really want to encourage folks to come with an open mind and come with questions. So with that, I'll pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Edward.
Hello, my name is Edward. I'm currently a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. I sit on the MHA Youth Policy Accelerator, and it's really great to be with everyone today. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm Sarah Chinadura. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently a graduate student at in New York studying environmental science and policy, and I'm very, very, very passionate about the role of policy in solving the world's problems. And I also sit on the Mental Health Policy Accelerator with Edward.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Howard. I'm originally from Maryland, living in Florida now, and I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy for Mental Health America. Happy to
And
be working with our Youth Policy Accelerator young leaders today.
And I'm Jackie Menjivar. I am realizing now that I didn't introduce myself at the top of the webinar, but I'm the manager of peer and youth advocacy here at MHA. Prior to my work at MHA, I was at another organization that focused a lot on civic engagement and getting out the vote among young people in particular. So this is sort of a passionate area for me. And with that, we're going to start first with some questions that we have for our panelists, but we will close out the session with a Q&A with the audience. So as always, if you have questions, please submit them via the chat and we will be collecting and taking those. Cool. So with that, we can get started. I want to start first acknowledging once again that this process can be really confusing and really overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there when it comes to the electoral process, to candidates and their platforms. My question for the panelists is, what are the best ways to stay updated on these issues and candidates without getting overwhelmed?
I'm happy to go first. Stop me if I go on too long. So I always, when I was first getting involved with politics and learning, I really just kind of listened on TV or checked like news articles here and there. So one of the things you can do is set time aside, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, set a timer to read up on current events, to kind of check news sources. You can find trusted sources of information online through journals, forums, or news apps, but it's always know there's a little bit of bias because we're human and none of us are inherently unbiased. It's our job as a consumer of information to think critically about what we're reading and read different sources so you can on a similar topic, so you can think critically about how one source reports a similar issue differently than another source. And then you can figure out at the end of the day which source kind of really hits home for you or seems most neutral. Just so folks are aware, nationally, some sources of information are NPR and PBS. They're publicly funded and supposed to be neutral without a spin. Some other resources are New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. They're thought to have a slant one way, but are really far-reaching in leadership and tend to be at least able to report on both national and local issues. And then if you're looking for Washington, D.C. specific current events or Hill rags, as we say, to read through, there's Politico, The Hill, and Roll Call. And those are actually written by journalists who are walking the halls of Congress, attending events with members. And then you can, of course, know that all politics is local. So you want to be familiar with whatever your regional papers are. For me, it'd be like the Palm Beach Post or the Baltimore Sun if I'm back visiting family.
Wow, that is truly amazing. I think you really said it all. If there's one thing that I could add was that um I'm on LinkedIn a lot, just as typically as like a college student. And I think there's actually a lot of great resources like newsletters on LinkedIn that like give out a lot of resources that I feel like are overlooked, especially in the media. Like there are a couple of, especially like youth mental health creators on LinkedIn that do an amazing job giving resources out. Gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head, but if you just search it up on LinkedIn, you'll definitely find them.
Yeah, and also I feel like social media is an amazing resource to connect with candidates on a personal level. A lot of candidates on our local, statewide, and national level tend to have social media presences, including on TikTok and Instagram. Oftentimes I'll follow these Instagram accounts whenever I'm between classes and everything to kind of like learn more about candidates' platforms. And also sometimes in the past, I've struggled with feeling overwhelmed with like following so many issues and following so many candidates. And for me, how I've navigated that feeling of overwhelm is kind of like creating a list of issues I care the most about and focusing on those and following kind of like platforms, organizations that highlight those issues and candidates around those issues. Additionally, on a more local level, there tends to be like a lot of like town halls and community events where they invite the candidates to talk about the issues that they care about. For example, literally 2 weeks ago, Columbia University hosted an event with District 69 candidates to talk about their policy initiatives. And it was amazing hearing from candidates themselves on what policies they care about. I also know for the presidential elections, there will be debates happening soon. So following along with those, it's also a very good way to understand the differences between these candidates' policies, because sometimes these policies can overlap, especially on a local level. So attending these community events or these debates can be a good way to decipher the differences between these policies.
Yeah, I really like that advice of you don't need to know everything about every candidate's platforms, like focusing in on the few things that are most important to you. I think really helps to like prevent that overwhelm. And it's fun that both you and Eddie both brought up social media. I think social media is such a big source of information for young people, especially, that we should recognize that like that is where a lot of people are getting their information, and how do we do that in a way that's like safe and accurate. And in that vein, I guess I wonder how how can we spot and shut down misinformation during elections, which we know can be kind of prevalent on social media, whether that's myths that aren't actually true, or just misinformation about platforms or about the process. If y'all could talk a little bit about things you've seen and how folks can help stop it.
That's a great question, Jackie, and thank you for it. I would say the best way that I've come to realize, like how to stop information or realize you're reading misinformation, is just to read a lot. In the sense that if you pick up the first article that you read, if that's all of your knowledge on a certain topic, then you're gonna think that's 100% of all the information that's out there about this single topic, right? But let's say you read five, six, seven, eight different articles on the exact same topic, you're bound to get different perspectives, different interviews, different experts speaking on the topic. And just being able to form that kind of 360 overview of a single topic is really, really great, especially when it comes to politics, when I think nowadays politics is very dividing and polarized, and people will push their own opinions out there and think that it's the only opinion out there, when in reality there's a lot of people on both sides and more even in the middle. So I think just reading is a super important skill that I wish I personally developed more, and I wish I read more every day.
I agree with Edward. I think diversifying your different platforms of information is important, so you're not just sitting in an echo chamber of the same information coming in. So for me, I used to only get all my news from TikTok. That was my only form of getting news. And after deciding to study policy as a master's degree, I've realized how important it is to diversify where you get your news from. So now I read news from like different sources to understand, like Edward said, the whole 360 view of an issue. And also I fact check everything and cross check information. And also it's really important for me to look at the source of the information and who is writing the article, for example, so I understand the biases behind it. So that's how I've been navigating misinformation.
So when you say fact check, do you read other articles like Eddie suggested? Or I was actually thinking about like going to Google Scholar, which is like all peer-reviewed articles that other people have had to like vote on before they're published. is that a way to fact check, or what do you do to fact check?
Definitely. So for me, I was specifically looking into climate change policy, and there tends to be a lot of misinformation about climate change. So for example, I have used Google Scholar in the past, and also I've looked to see when it comes to statistics and scientific information, looking to see whether the sources are written by experts in that area. I also look at like more like evidence-based studies, and also a form of fact checking for me has also been cross-reading different articles and also reading information from primary sources. So for example, if I'm reading about someone's experience in India, reading a article by someone living in India directly impacted by that experience is something that's important to me to receive the information directly from the person impacted by what they're talking about.
Thanks so much. That's helpful.
I think that's also really valuable. It goes along with what Karen was encouraging before of like also reading news outlets that are located in your community and that speak to those kind of local issues because those are the issues that are impacting them the most directly. So I think you make a really good point of like seeking out that sort of like first person account and information of what's going on. And in that vein, let's segue to talk a little bit about what that local impact can look like when it comes to voting and the impact that it can have on our lives. So how what are some ways that maybe you've seen elections and voting make an impact in your community, whether that's at a local, state, or a larger level?
Well, I can start with this one since I probably have the most voting history here. I'll just say that it was really cool to be like working for the legislature during the Affordable Care Act debate, which is also known as Obamacare. And one of the really cool things about that legislation is that it made mental health and substance use benefits an essential benefit that must be covered under health insurance plans that were being offered by government entities. And that really set a new standard for ensuring that when a person was signing up for healthcare, they weren't signing up to just get physical or surgical benefits, that they were also getting mental health benefits too. And then another thing that was really exciting about that is, I mean, I was literally like 26 years old when the legislation passed, and that was the age that insurance companies were required to cover up to when a dependent or a young person was on their parents' insurance. So previously, a young person got kicked off of their insurance at age 18. And now you can stay on your parents' insurance until age 26, all because of that legislation. And I felt like that was directly something that it was part of my vote when I voted for the president at the time, Obama. And even though as an individual, um, I didn't necessarily have a chance to have a conversation with the president, I felt like I was still positively impacted because that was a really important platform that he ran on, and he made sure that no matter what during his first term that healthcare legislation passed, and it cost him the House of Representatives. So there was a backlash, and he ended up staying president, and then the House went Republican after that, but there was still some really big wins during his first term.
And for me, in 2020, I lived in Arizona and I supported a local candidate running for office. Her name was Yasmin Ansari, and she was running for city council for Phoenix. And she eventually became elected as the youngest woman of color in my city. And voting for her and also helping her campaign was honestly such an empowering moment for me to also see someone who looked like me in a position to create change. And something that I learned from that experience in helping her campaign is that you don't necessarily have to have like specific mental health policies to impact mental health, if that makes sense. For example, she created a lot of policies around creating more green spaces in Phoenix, which in turn are connected to mental health, because there have been a lot of studies on how green spaces can support mental health. She also created a lot of refugee resources, because Phoenix is a huge spot for refugees to come in. I know during that time, a lot of refugees from Afghanistan came in, and she created a lot of resources for them to help them feel less alone. And also, she eventually became one of the strongest policy supporters for also mental health. Even right now on Twitter, she's been posting about supporting more accessible access to mental health care and behavioral care. So it's been amazing being able to see that happen on a local scale and seeing someone in city council be able to create that change locally. For me, that also taught me that along with voting, you can also create change in your community by supporting candidates you care about, by volunteering for them, canvassing for them, or also giving them feedback on what policies you want to hear. What I learned through that experience is that a lot of candidates running for office are very open to changing their policies or adding more things to their policy bucket to support their community. And sometimes they hold kind of like these local hearing sessions. I know, for example, Yasemin Ansari did that. So doing research in your local area to see if there's any events to give feedback to local candidates running for office is another way to kind of like directly impact the policies being created in your area and the candidates running for those policies.
I really love that. And it must have been so cool to see that happening in real time, like that your vote and your participation in this person's campaign led to them actually being put in this position of power as a change maker. Which is like is super cool. And it goes back to what Tim was saying earlier about how, elected officials are accessible. Like it only takes a few voices to convince them that an issue is important or that an issue needs to be on their platform. So really, really glad that you have that example of how it worked out for you. Um, so let's talk now about the impact that voting can have on you personally, especially your mental health. Because as we've talked about, it is a stressful process for a lot of people and a really challenging process. So what impact do you think, not just voting, but also the stress of the general political climate, the polarization, what impact does that have on young voters? And how can we help each other cope?
Thank you for the question, Jackie. I always like sharing a story about one of the elections that happened in our city. So I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I think like 20, 30 years ago or something, one of our late mayor elections, like it came down to less than 10 votes that separated him and the other candidate. And I think something that people don't really, and our city has we're like the second largest city in Indiana. So it was like a not a small election, like big campaigns, and it came down to less than 10 votes. And I think citywide politics and statewide politics affect people a lot more than they think. I think a lot of media is always focused on like the federal level politics and what's happening in DC and the Hill, but statewide politics, especially within like your own public school systems and like the mental health care that they provide to the students, has a really, really big, profound impact. So I think getting involved in statewide politics is actually um, a lot more easier to do and a lot more less like stressful in the sense that state reps, like state senators, state representatives, like they love engaging with youth constituents that they have in their own cities because they themselves live in the cities, and you quite might well like see them like at your local Starbucks or at your local Walmart. So I would like suggest like trying to get involved in like citywide politics and just really like putting yourself out there and into that environment. Once you get into that like circle, it's a lot easier to navigate around and making sure that your voices are heard.
Yeah, I really like that as like an avenue to help combat disillusionment with the political process, which I think a lot of people kind of hold those feelings, particularly for sort of like federal processes. So I think sometimes taking that local action and seeing it in a more tangible way can help combat disillusionment and help kind of remind you of the power of that kind of action. What kind of like entry level beginner things would you recommend, or Sai as well, if you have any thoughts for someone who maybe wants to get involved in something like that?
I bet Sai has a lot of experience working in local politics as well. But if there's just one thing that I could say is, I think most states right now have like a so it's called, for Indiana, it's called the Indiana Legislative Youth Advisory Council, or it's, I think each city, most cities have like a mayor's youth council. And those are just two very, very easy ways to get involved with local politics. I was past president of our local mayor's youth council, and I also sit in our Indiana Legislative Youth Council. And for the students who are super, super interested in politics, intersection with mental health, it's an amazing way to like really, really be able to understand how local politics work, but also to really have an influence on your statewide politicians. These politicians really care about youth voices, much more, in my opinion, than federal level politicians, just because they're not, always back in their home states, right? State level politics, their re-elections are sooner. They really, really have to connect with their constituents on a much deeper level, and especially the youth.
I love that you do that, Edward. Super inspiring. I think youth advisory councils are so important in kind of like bridging the gap between young people and these people creating policies. And if you don't see a youth advisory council in your area, I recommend creating one. Right now, I'm in the process of creating a youth climate commission for the New York City Council to basically allow more youth voices to be heard in these spaces of policy change. Additionally, a lot of state legislators, city council members have internships. I know a lot of different local bodies are also running for office, so you can also join as a campaign fellow for local candidates. That's what I did when I first started my political journey. Also, on a high school level and undergrad level and grad level, there tend to be a lot of clubs in colleges and high schools around political advocacy. So joining those clubs is also really important in creating community. For me, some ways I've been learning to navigate my anxiety about the future of the world and about voting is participating in mobilizing actions. For example, canvassing for candidates I care about, participating in community events where there's open conversations about policies, and also volunteering for campaigns. Oftentimes, a lot of candidates locally on a statewide and national level have applications on their website for volunteers to join them. So in the past, I volunteered for different campaigns to basically channel my anxiety around voting into tangible action.
Oh, that's so cool. And really excited to hear about you starting that commission and taking that initiative. That is amazing. Sorry, Karen, I see you unmuted if you have something to add.
Well, I was gonna just say that I like both answers. So thank you all. And the kind of formula that I came up with was I've tried to balance targeted action with really meaningful breaks. So my targeted action could be the activities that Eddie and Saia have talked about, getting involved, volunteering, getting out the vote, talking to my neighbors, trying to help with getting people engaged in the legislative or electoral process. And then when I take the breaks that I like to take, I'll either decide that I'm not going to watch cable news, I'm only going to read news, or I'm going to go touch grass. I'm going to ride a bike or take a walk. And those are things that are really important. I know that there was a study that came out last year that said young people with smartphones each day receive 237 notifications from different apps. And it's a wonder that MHA's ADHD screening on our website has become the most popular screening for people under age 18. So I would just say try to balance. One way that I try to balance taking breaks is I make sure all my notifications are off. So when I turn on my phone or I start the day, I don't have any sounds or push notifications from any app, and that's one way that you can kind of protect your peace and take breaks from the news cycle, which is now 24/7.
I love that. I like meaningful breaks. I think putting as much effort into our rest as we put into our action is so crucial to be able to find that right balance, because both kind of inform one another. And when you don't have balance in one, the other suffers. So I like that reminder, Karen, to take time to do that. Um, and yeah, thank you, Saya and Eddie, for your answers as well. I'm just struck at how, even just the two of y'all, how passionate you are. And I think that is reflected in younger people in general. I think that there are a lot of myths about young people and like apathy. Young people don't vote. Young people are apathetic. And I think that the opposite is true, that young people are really passionate about these movements. They really care deeply about these movements. And I think maybe there are some challenges that not everyone is familiar with when it comes to young people and voting, that we know young people are passionate. So what are the things that are keeping young people from voting? What are the hurdles that are in the way? And these could be things that you've experienced yourselves, or things that you've seen your peers experience, your peers talk about. What is challenging about voting as a young people, and how can we overcome it?
I'll just quickly say that as a younger person, I think one of the challenges was really understanding the process and that my vote counted. So I think that ensuring school systems still have civics classes is one of the ways. So advocating for civics or talking to your teachers or other like school personnel about getting involved in government is one way to get answers to to questions that you might not even know that you have, by talking to your American government teacher or another world studies teacher that you have in your high school or college campus. You can kind of learn a little bit more about processes. And then the second thing I think was transportation. So just so folks know, there are kind of volunteer advocates and people who help with rides to polls. Um, Typically, your voting location is supposed to be nearby your home, but sometimes it's not convenient. Or if you want to vote early, you might have to go to a location that's further away. So just know that like finding transportation, maybe getting a ride or teaming up with other people to join and go vote at the same time so that you all can carpool together is one way to overcome the transportation issue.
I think, first of all, Karen, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's really important. And I also agree with the transportation thing. That's something I used to struggle with when I first voted. My first voting experience was for the president of the US a few years ago. And I didn't know how to get to the voting station. And that's something I had to overcome and navigate. I think personally for me, the thing I struggled with the most when I was younger is feeling like my vote didn't matter. And I've been working to deconstruct that every single day. And some instances where um, voting sometimes is really, 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 I mean, voting is always important. And I also think on a local scale, there tends to be smaller margins when it comes between candidates, because less people tend to vote locally. And I think more people should also vote locally. Um, One example where there's like a very small margin was in 1977. The state representative of Vermont won by literally one vote. And that's just one example where like your vote counts. Additionally, there's this quote that I hung up in my room just to give myself more hope in the world. It's by Christiana Figueres. She basically composed the Paris Agreement. And she said, when your mind tells you that you are just one person, too small to make a difference, so why bother? You can remind yourself that tipping points are non-linear. We don't know what is going to make the difference, but we do know that in the end, systems do shift and all the little actions add up to a new world. Every time you make an individual choice to be a responsible custodian of this beautiful earth, you contribute towards major transformations. Every single vote counts. and you deciding not to show up to the polls because you feel like you don't matter or your voice doesn't matter is doing not just yourself a disfavor, but the world. And for me, I feel like some ways I've been navigating feeling like my vote doesn't matter is it's also kind of like mobilizing other people to vote. So it's not just me going out to vote, but other people alongside with me. Um, Kind of like what Karen said, bringing other people with you to go vote is important. Additionally, sometimes it can be so easy to miss deadlines for voting, or be confused where to go to vote. So making sure that this information is more accessible is important. And I feel like schools and universities have a very strong role to play in helping young people have more access to that information.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And that quote is absolutely beautiful. I'll have to find it after this webinar because I think that that is a sentiment that we can all hold on to, not just during election times, but at any point. And it's important to remember that, voting is not the only avenue for action, but it is an avenue, and it is one that you should take every opportunity you have to take it. Um, and I love that, Saya, you talk about bringing other people with you to vote. I think that can help make it feel a little less intimidating and also feel more impactful and more like you're part of a collective voice. So wondering, in that spirit, how can we use our networks to make sure that everyone around us is ready and informed to vote?
Well, one thing you can do is you can invite people to go with you to the poll. I think sometimes that is a tough question to ask, but if you have a close friend and you want them to get engaged, you can ask if they'll go with you, or a neighbor. And I've done that several times. It's worked out, but sometimes it doesn't. What else do you guys think?
I feel like social media is a very powerful platform to encourage people to vote. For example, Sada Mir, he created a campaign called Get Out the Vote a few years ago, where he created an Instagram filter called Vote. And every time someone voted, they would use that filter. And around hundreds of thousands of people use that, including celebrities. And it helped kind of like create more widespread social media awareness about voting. I also think sharing information about deadlines is important. In 2020, I literally dedicated my whole Instagram account towards educating my peers about deadlines for voting, what different candidates were talking about. So I feel like social media is a very powerful place to create more awareness for people.
Definitely. I would agree. I would go back to LinkedIn. I love using LinkedIn if you can't tell. I think it's a really, really great way to connect with other like youth change makers, especially in mental health. Like there's a lot of mental health creators on LinkedIn that you can just cold LinkedIn message. And I guarantee you, if you message enough of them, one of them will definitely respond to you and help you in any sort of way, whether it's connecting to legislators, just getting in more involved in youth advocacy work. I think, you know, they like to say like, go alone if you want to go fast, but go together if you want to go far. And especially in the world of politics, where policy change is sometimes very slow and very can make you very like mad. Like working with other people and making sure that all of your voices are heard is very, very important.
Thank you all so much for such insightful and thoughtful answers. With that, we're gonna spend the last few minutes we've got taking some audience questions. As a reminder, please drop your questions in the chat if you have them. We can start with a question that we might have to tap Tim for an answer. But here's the question. Where would you recommend reaching out politically to assist or advocate for patients, healthcare workers, and mental health workers? Also, what's the best route politically to speak up about insurance companies taking advantage of patients and professionals experiencing barriers due to insurance? And Tim, feel free to chime in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll address the insurance part. So there's a federal law called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And that law has a very simple concept. It says insurance coverage for mental health must be no more restrictive than insurance coverage for other medical care. The law itself is pretty complicated, but you don't need to worry about that. It's a federal law and it applies basically to pretty much most types of health insurance. And there's a lot of different entities involved for enforcing it. But one thing we do know is that insurance companies generally are not following that law, or they're having trouble following the law. So what you can do is reach out, and you've probably never heard of them. You've probably never even thought of them. But every state has an insurance department, and they're responsible for enforcing laws related to insurance, like auto insurance, flood insurance, home insurance, and health insurance, including the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And then even if they're not the right regulator, because sometimes it might be a federal agency like the United States Department of Labor, they have a lot of enforcement authority. But if you reach out to your state insurance department, they'll get you to the right place, unless they're an absolutely terrible insurance department. I mean, most of them are very good. So I would say, figure out what your state insurance department is, and reach out to them and say, hey, I'm having problems. I'm seeing problems with people getting access to mental health care. And I've heard of this thing called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, or just call it the federal parity law. They'll know what you're talking about. And say, I think there might be a problem here. I want you to look into it. And it's a complicated law, but it's not your job to understand the complicated law. It's their job to understand and enforce that complicated law. So reach out to them, because that's what regulators are for. They're there to enforce the law. They're supposed to help you. So reach out to your insurance department, and if they're not the right person for that enforcement piece, they'll send you to the right place. So I would say that's definitely what you want to do when you're having problems with insurance coverage for mental health and substance use disorder. Reach out to the state insurance department and say, hey, there's a federal law that's supposed to protect me. I want you to look into this.
And we have another question that also maybe Karen or Tim could support. When supporting legislation for aftercare in the mental health community treatment, what do you hope to support in terms of treatment recovery models, and how to push for more competitive salaries and mental health staff in the governor's state budget?
Yeah, so I can address that. So first of all, more competitive salaries for mental health staff. Like, first of all, that is so huge, because as we all know, mental health professionals are grossly underpaid. Some of that's insurance as well. Private insurance has, they pay those stuff. But I think reach in terms of, say, a governor's budget. Like, look, we have this mental health crisis. The governor's budget spends, usually billions of dollars every year. So we have a mental health crisis that's killing, in your state, probably dozens of people every day. Do we want to pay more to save lives, or do we want to pay more for, renaming a bridge, or something like that? So I think that you need to put it in the perspective of, this is a life and death issue. It's not partisan at all. It doesn't matter whether your governor's Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever it is. So it's definitely something that, you need to frame it as, it's an investment in life. It's an investment in recovery. So I think that's probably the best way to frame it in terms of getting those resources. Because right now, I will say this: it used to be you weren't allowed to, if you're an advocate, you weren't allowed to ask for things that cost money for mental health. That's not the case anymore. Like, all state legislators and governors, they're willing to spend money on mental health. You just need to make a compelling case for what needs to be spent and why.
All right, we do just have 5 minutes left here, so we can go ahead and start wrapping up. I know Karen has some further resources from MHA that we'd like to share with you. So with that, thank our panelists. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Saya. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Tim, so much for your insightful and thoughtful answers. Really appreciate you being here and approaching this conversation with honesty and curiosity. And with that, I'll pass it on over to Karen.
Hey, thanks so much, Jackie. I just wanted to note that MHA also last week released our election toolkit. It's a voter guide that provides resources for anyone who might be interested in dipping their toe in the electoral process. There is a link that hopefully we can get dropped into the chat. But on page 3 of the voter toolkit, which you can download from MHA's website, there are resources to learn about voting and phone numbers you can call if you feel like someone is making you uncomfortable at a polling location. For instance, you have every right to vote. If for some reason you're turned away, you are a little being asked questions that make you uncomfortable, or if someone is pushing you kind of not to vote because for whatever random reason, there is an election protection line that you can call and get kind of some input and figure out if there is a actual valid reason that you're getting this kind of feedback from the polling member or someone else at the polling location, or if you actually need to take action against them. Page 7 has a voter checklist. The voter checklist is really cool because it goes through, it gives you ideas for what you can do, starting with just literally registering to vote, then going to learning more about candidates and issues and places that you can look for that information, like the websites of the League of Women Voters is one. It also gives you an idea to ask a question at a town hall or even host a town hall if you want to get a group of folks together to do that. You can write a letter, email the candidates, and create a voting plan for the day. I really like the idea of creating a voting plan because then you don't have to worry about anything on the day of. You can just follow your plan. And if something goes awry, just kind of understand that sometimes plans change. And then finally on page 11 has questions for the candidates, as I mentioned. And then finally, page 21, the very last page of the toolkit, we have articles to help you protect your personal mental health. So for instance, like I said earlier, I like to take breaks. I will take a walk. I will go sit in the sunshine. I will make sure to touch something green or gaze at something green. And there are some articles on MHA's website that will help you with managing stress and your mental health, including reminders to get off social media or otherwise disconnect. So hopefully it's really useful to you. You can share it with friends and family. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to follow up with us.
Thank you, Karen. And with that, we'll wrap up this webinar. We're right at time. So thank you again for being here and being part of this conversation. Please check out the voter guide, mhanational.org/vote, and share with your friends, create a voter plan, and help impact mental health in a local and larger level. Great. And be sure to check your emails for links to the voter guide and the recording of this session as well. Thanks again, and good night, everyone.
See ya. Thanks, Jackie.